Welcome to this video, all about champagne and sparkling wine. There are a few ways to make sparkling wine, and it is important to understand what these are in order to appreciate the different styles that are available. Let's get straight into the nitty-gritty, because the first method is the traditional method, also previously known as the Methode Champenoise. It was made famous by the Champagne region and is now used for making everything from Cremant to Cava and sparkling wines around the world. Normally, when we're making a wine, we start off with crushed grape juice. We then use yeast, which eats all of the sugar in the juice and converts it into alcohol with carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And the wine then becomes dry because all the sugar's been removed. With traditional method, this takes place, and then there is a second fermentation which takes place in the bottle. So the bottle is filled with wine, there is a little bit of extra yeast and nutrients added in and some extra sugar, and then the bottle is sealed. This means that the CO2 that is produced as a byproduct is trapped inside of the bottle. It also means once the yeast has converted all the sugar into alcohol and it dies off, it forms what we call the lees, so dead yeast cells essentially, and other nutrients that form a slight sediment in the wine. When the wine is left in contact with these lees, we call it lees aging. And the longer that you leave it, the more pronounced the biscuity, toasty, brioche, bready aromas will be, because it's the yeast cells decomposing. And if you've ever heard the word autolytic, then this is what that insinuates. So once you have finished the lees aging, you need to remove the sediment from the wine so you get a nice clear wine. So what happens is, racks like the one you see behind me are used to turn the bottle, quarter turns every day, to slowly allow the yeast to form in the top here, and it is completely upside down. Or you can get gyro pallets which do the process in about 2 to 3 days rather than about 5 to 6 weeks. Once the sediment is here, it is dipped in a frozen brine solution. The bottle is then turned up this way and the seal is taken off and the sediment pops out the bottle. And that is why traditionally this foil was used on bottles. It was to hide the fact that some wine had escaped. These days, however, they use it as an opportunity to finish the blending of the wine. So, for example, with a rosé, in Champagne you are allowed to add a little bit of red wine to a white wine to make a rosé. It's one of the only places in Europe that you can do it. So they top up the wine, they might want to add a little bit more sugar, called the Dosage, to improve or adjust the sweetness levels, creating the final balance of the wine. And then it is sealed with the cork at quite a high pressure, about the same as what you would find in a tractor tyre, about 5 to 6 bars of pressure. So that's the traditional method, and as I say, it's used all around the world. Next up we have the tank method, and this is used for wines like Prosecco. What happens here? The first fermentation takes place in a large sealed tank, and then the second fermentation takes place in the same large sealed tank. The wine is bottled under pressure, so the CO2 is trapped within that tank and put into the bottle, sealed under pressure. And what you'll find is you don't have the biscuity brioche aromas that you might find with champagne. Instead, you get a much cleaner, fresher, purer fruit because we remove those lees straight away, and there is often no lees aging with something that's undergone the tank method. We also have carbonation, which, as the name suggests, is the injection of CO2 into a wine. So this is often the cheapest and simplest way of making sparkling wine, and you might find that they're not as complex. Often with wines designed to undergo these fermentations in the bottle, they develop much more characteristics. With carbonation, you're simply adding gas, so it doesn't develop any extra characteristics, it just adds the bubbles. There are quite a few labelling terms that can be a little bit confusing or even misleading when you're trying to choose a sparkling wine. Starting with Italy, we have Frizzante. Now this means semi-sparkling. The wine is at about 2.5 to 3 bars of pressure, which means that you will find it under a common cork rather than a wider cork with a wire cage. Spumante means fully sparkling, so about 5 to 6 bars of pressure, the same as champagne. Non-vintage means that the grapes for that wine are taken from a blend of different vintages or harvests, years. In champagne, non-vintage also indicates that the wine must be aged for at least 12 months on the lees before it can be released, and once it's released, it's best to be drunk in the next 1 to 2 years. Vintage means a wine that is made from grapes taken from one single harvest. So the vintage, the year, will often be labelled on the bottle, and it is only in the best years that these wines tend to be made. Again, in champagne there are implications, meaning that the wine has to be aged on its lees for 36 months before it can be released. This creates a more complex wine, meaning that it will age better once it has been released, but it's still delicious to be drunk straight away. Blanc de Noir is a white wine made from red grapes such as Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. Blanc de Blanc is a white wine made completely from white grapes, namely Chardonnay. Now here's where it gets a little confusing when we're talking about the sweetness levels on a bottle of wine. Starting off with Brut Nature or Zero Dosage, these are wines that have no extra sugar added. They often be quite dry and acidic, but sometimes they have a little bit extra lees aging, which softens the acidity a bit further. Extra-Brut allows a very small addition of sugar. Brut is the most common style for traditional method sparkling wines, allowing up to about 12 grams of residual sugar per litre. It also makes the driest, lightest versions of Prosecco. Extra dry or extra sec is the most commonly found version of Prosecco. So confusingly, this is a shade sweeter than Brut, even though it says extra dry. It allows about 12 to 17 grams of residual sugar per litre. Sec or dry is actually the sweetest version of Prosecco that you will find, with about 17 to 32 grams of residual sugar per litre. These are often richer, rounder, more full-bodied styles of Prosecco to balance out that sweetness. Demi-sec or medium dry, commonly found in champagne, is now being targeted at younger drinkers with a sweeter tooth because it has about 32 to 50 grams of sugar. After this we have Doux, which is anything from 50 upwards, so quite sweet. The best grapes for high quality sparkling wines tend to be found in regions around the world where other grapes might struggle to ripen. Talking northerly latitudes like Champagne or Sussex, or cooler coastal regions like Tasmania. This is because for that second fermentation you need to start with a grape that has quite high acidity and quite low levels of sugar so that the alcohol doesn't get too high and there is still quite a nice balance in the final wine. We could do a whole video all about champagne. It's such a fantastically complex wine, and it has heavily influenced the way that sparkling wine is made and drunk all around the world. Located towards the north of France, where the climate is a little bit cooler and the grapes enjoy digging into chalky soils that have plenty of limestone underneath, creating the ideal growing environment for grapes like Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, which are the big three names here. And there are what we refer to as the champagne grapes. Chardonnay brings plenty of acidity and green apple citrus characteristics. Pinot Noir brings structure and red fruit. And Pinot Meunier brings plenty of fruitiness and is often used for wines designed to be drunk young, like non-vintage. All three of these grape varieties are suited to the style of production used in the traditional method, as they really enjoy those autolytic characteristics, the dead yeast cells breaking down, adding those toasty notes of complexity to a wine. There are 8 regions in France that are allowed to produce Cremant. So we have the Alsace, Bordeaux, Burgundy, the Jura, the Savoie, the Rhône, Limoux and the Loire Valley. Each of these regions has different style thanks to the grape varieties that thrive there locally. For example, in Alsace, we can see slightly more aromatic crémants made using Pinot Blanc, giving plenty of stone fruit. In the Loire, which also is home to sparkling Vouvray and sparkling Saumur, Chenin Blanc is the grape of choice for white wines, giving it a more appley flavour. And we see Cabernet Franc and Pinot Noir for the rosé versions. Cava refers to a style of wine made in Spain rather than a specific region. However, the majority of the grapes are grown in the Penedès Hills in Catalonia, with other producers making it in Rioja as well as Valencia. The key grape varieties here are Paralleda, which isn't really grown anywhere else outside of Catalonia. Xaulot brings acidity and a slight earthiness to the wine and is great for those wines destined for aging. Macabeo is the third key Cava grape, and that brings a floral freshness to the wine, quite fruity, but does develop honeyed nutty characteristics when allowed to age. We also see Chardonnay and Pinot Noir permitted here now, thanks to some of the top champagne houses campaigning to try and put Cava on the same page as Champagne. The Prosecco region, tucked up in Veneto in the north of Italy, has really paved the way and created the affordable sparkling wine category, and it's in part thanks to Prosecco that we see such a variety of Cavas and Crémants on our shelves these days, as opposed to the luxury brand price tag that Champagne has created in the past for sparkling wine. Prosecco is made using the Glera grape variety. Now, they changed the name of the grape variety from Prosecco to Glera in order to protect the brand and the image of Prosecco and to stop other producers in other regions being able to use the grape variety Prosecco and confuse the brand image. Local legislation in Prosecco has very recently permitted the use of Pinot Noir to make Prosecco rosé, so that should be hitting our shelves probably early next year. With Prosecco, if you want to find the higher quality versions, look out for Conegliano Valdobbiadene. This is the historic hilly growing site in the centre of the Prosecco region. Asti is a wine that used to enjoy fame as an aperitif, and I think it still deserves a place in our fridge today. Look out for Moscato d'Asti, arguably the best quality version, sitting at low alcohol, so about 6 to 8%. It is semi-sparkling with a level of sweetness to it that means it is perfect for your afternoon tea. Franciacorta is a region within Lombardy in the north of Italy. It is cooled down by air rolling off the Alps, meaning it is Italy's answer to Champagne, using the traditional Champagne grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. It makes quite high quality styles with sometimes eye-wateringly expensive prices. Look out for the Riserva versions, which have to be aged for 60 months on the lees before they can be released. Finally, we have Lambrusco. While the name may have bad connotations for some, the region gives its name to a small selection of red grape varieties, so producing a sparkling red wine often has a slight sweetness to it, making it an absolutely perfect partner for a cheese board at the end of the meal or in the afternoon by the fireside. Trust me, it's one worth trying. Now, believe it or not, Germany is a big producer of sparkling wine, which they call Sekt. However, the Germans do drink most of it themselves. In fact, they import grapes from southern Europe to keep up with demand. So if you want German-grown grapes going into your Sekt, look out for Deutscher Sekt. And if you want a traditional method version, look out for Winzersekt. This is often made with Riesling, which creates quite a smoky, toasty characteristic to complement the limey green apple and fresh peach flavours of Riesling. In England and Wales, after 30 years of growing German grape varieties, often hybrids or crossings, designed for cooler climates, in the late 1980s we began to plant Champagne grape varieties, beginning a healthy rivalry with the Champagne region. You can now get a glass of Sussex as you would get a glass of champagne. And the quality has been consistently high, with the still wines also following suit. These days, many of the top producers do have reserve wines in stock. This means that year to year, they have built up and held back a small selection of wine so that when they create their non-vintage styles, they're able to use these reserve wines, kept normally in barrels or tanks, to create a consistent style year on year. As we all know, the weather in the UK varies quite dramatically, so this has been a really important factor in creating consistent styles for top wineries like Hattingley Valley. Let's take a look at the New World wine regions. It is common to see big-name European brands tapping into the potential of local markets across the world. For example, in the 1950s, Moët and Chandon sent two winemakers around the world to explore potential sites similar to those in Champagne, same soils, same climate, to plant Champagne grape varieties and make traditional method sparkling wines. The locations they found were all across the globe, from Australia to Argentina to China to Brazil to India to California. And they did boost the profile of these regions for producing sparkling wine. Starting with South Africa, you really want to look out for MCC wines here. They indicate that they are traditional method, standing for Methode Classique. This is an industry-run association that dictates the lees aging has to be a minimum of 12 months, with most producers leaning more towards 15 to 18. In Chile, the preferred method of production is the tank method. This is in part because they do like to produce sparkling wine using Sauvignon Blanc, so similar to the Glera grape variety in Prosecco, the tank method preserves that aromatic, fruity, floral intensity of the grape variety. In Argentina, we've seen a rise in the level of production in recent years. There's now about 150 wineries producing sparkling wine in a range and a variety of styles. Tank method is quite popular, but there are a good amount of medium to premium quality sparkling traditional method wines. Australia makes a large volume of wine. About 6% of this is sparkling, so it's still quite considerable quantity. Some of this is sparkling Shiraz. There are varying degrees of quality out there. Look out for the velvety, rich styles that aren't quite as sweet. And you have high-end traditional method wines made using the Champagne grape varieties in cooler regions such as Tasmania. New Zealand is an ideal climate for making sparkling wines. With an abundance of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and the cooler climate, it does make some really fantastic traditional method versions. But the focus is still on Sauvignon Blanc, so we do see some carbonated versions of this. In the USA, the majority of production is centred around California, with Oregon and Washington State also producing wine. It comes in a wide variety of styles, ranging from the sweet, fruit-flavoured, carbonated rosés to the premium, high-end quality wines made in coastal regions across California. The category of sparkling wine is vast, and I'm sure we will be doing more videos on these topics to follow, especially as we only briefly touched on champagne. So, as always, if you do have any questions as you're exploring the different words on those labels and finding your own perfect sparkling wine, do email events@averys.com and we'll be happy to help. Thanks very much.